So I did my topic on the idea of colonialism and the white savior complex and how this relates to the church doing mission work and how this affects the women of those countries that the churches are going to serve. So colonialism dates back many years, and a very big example is when Christopher Columbus came from Europe to discover America. And this story that we pretty much have all learned in elementary school is that, Christopher Columbus came and there was no people in the country, or there were Native Americans in the country, and it was a very civil taking over of the country. But this is actually an idea of colonialism where this country had belonged to people already, and this white person came and overtook the country with genocide and violence, and there were already people there, and so these people ultimately suffered and are still suffering today because of this. So this is the idea of colonialism, and the idea of the white savior complex, which is more relevant to today's context, is when white people who want to help those who are not white with the intention of boasting about their service, as a result, simultaneously viewing people of color as in need of saving by white civilized people. So before I say anything about the church and everything, I think mission work is very important, and there's a lot of ways that the church can help serve people of different nationalities and races, and it's really important that the church is thinking about this and doing it. But I think a lot of times the church falls into this idea of the white savior complex, with doing mission work in order to be seen as a better Christian or as a better person, or to fulfill some need in themselves, instead of actually wanting to help those of a different country. So mission work, people could argue, goes back to the time of the Apostle Paul in AD 500, when Paul traveled to different nations of the world to give the word of the gospel and of Jesus. There have been many forms of missions since this time, like the Jesuits, and up until today, where there are missionaries living and serving in different varying third world countries that are supporting the country through their faith and serving from the bottom up. So the two people that I did my research on was Teresa Mambari Hinga, who was born in Kenya, and then Steve Corbett, who wrote the book When Helping Hurts, Alleviating Poverty Without Hurting the Poor and Yourself. So Teresa Hinga was born in Kenya, like I said, and she later moved to England, got her PhD in religious studies and African Christianity from the University of Lancaster in England, and then later moved to Santa Clara, California, where she taught at the University of College and Arts and Sciences as a professor in the religious department. So she wrote the book African Christian Feminist, The Enduring Search for What Matters. And in this book, she talks about how colonialism has affected Black women of Africa, and especially women of Islam, because it's a major religion in many countries in Africa, and so ultimately they're most affected. So feminism in this context, to Professor Hinga, should look like understanding and listening to women's lived experiences and how their society around them has shaped their lives. So feminism, the idea would be to simply just listen to women and let them do the leading and the talking, and learn from women of color instead of going to teach them something. So this means we must look at women's lives in a more open-ended understanding rather than just focus on a Christian women. I think this is really important, as the church, a lot of times in mission work, the church goes with the intention of bringing God to a country or a civilization, but this is actually so hurtful to the women of the country, because not all of them are Christian. They might be a part of Islam or any other varying religion, and this ultimately silences them and oppresses them even further. So liberation for this reason looks like listening and letting women speak. This is contrary to the idea of missionaries coming into a country and teaching them about God, or trying to help in ways that ultimately silence women of the country. I also found an article while doing this research that talks about mission work that actually ended up doing more damage to a country before the missionaries came because the workers were unexperienced or used too many resources that cost the country more than not having the white missionaries come at all. There was a place in Mexico where a church, in America, the church came to a church in Mexico to do a missions trip, and they built a wall. And the wall ended up having to be torn down completely because of the way that the missionaries did it, because they were so inexperienced. There was also a church in Mexico that was painted multiple times by multiple different missionary groups. So this like shows that it wasn't, there was no helping to the country. It was just for the people coming to help to make it look like they were helping. So in Steve Corbett's book, he talks about how to actually do mission work that will improve the country as a white person of privilege. So some things that he mentioned were staying in the country longer than a few weeks, so to really do an impact on the country in a positive way. Doing research about the country before you go in order to understand their culture more, because it very much differs from American culture, and learning their history, so as to why you're going and why it needs to be served or something along those lines, and learning parts of the language, like some sort of part of the language of the culture that you're going to in order to communicate better with locals. And instead of going to establish something in the country, go to a country that already has something established, or go with an organization that is already established in the country. So as not to come and save a country that needs to be saved, but go to a country that needs to be served and serve from the bottom up. So this is what I found when researching the white savior complex, and how this idea of colonialism and the white savior complex actually affects people of color in different countries, in third world countries, due to the missionaries in America and in first world countries going to do mission work, ultimately ending up doing more harm to the people and to the country.